welcome everybody who's just joined us for this. It's going to be a short but hopefully an informative webinar on gap assessments for the 27001 Information Security Management System. So without further ado, we'll go into the next slide then. So a little bit about CertiKit. We're a leading creator of compliance toolkits and we provide ISO services, and we're based in Derbyshire in the UK. We founded in 2010 and we've helped so far more than 4,000 customers globally to achieve compliance to either ISO standards or information security standards. We specialize in ISO and data protection compliances, and our mission is to make compliance easy so that business can achieve certification to and to benefit from the chosen standard of data protection regulations. And if you need any more information about what we are, what we can do and what we offer, please go to our website at certikit.com. Now, a little bit about me. That's me. My main job is a compliance consultant with CertiKit. I'm certified at 27,000, 9,001, 14,000, 45,000 lead auditor. I'm also an auditor for 22301 business continuity. I'm also a lead implementer for an integrated management system consisting of any two of 9001, 14,001 or 45,001, or a combination of all three. I consult for the ISO management systems. Predominantly, I'm on the 9014, 45, and 22301, and have now just currently qualified as a lead auditor for 27,001, so I'll be doing some more of that. But Jerry, the guy you heard at the beginning, is our main 27,001 consultant with 1 million years of experience. Amongst my other jobs, I'm also the technical author and I assist in the development of the documents within the toolkits and the updating any new toolkit documents. It's my job to gather the information, put it in the format, and then have it Q&A by the people. And finally, for my sins, I'm a black belt Lean Six Sigma practitioner, which helps me when I'm starting mapping processes in other standards. Okay, what we're going to be looking at today. As I said, this is a fairly short, but it will be hopefully an informative webinar for you today. So we're going to look at what a gap assessment is. What's the definition of a gap assessment? The purpose of conducting the gap assessment. What's required to do the gap assessment. What you need to prepare to conduct a gap assessment. The actual conducting of the gap assessment, the process of what you need to do, how you need to do it. Analysing the facts, the findings. Generating a gap assessment report. So what it is, the purpose, the requirements, preparing for, doing it, analysing the findings, and then creating the report. So what is a gap assessment in layman's terms? Essentially, it's a way to find out what you have, or more importantly, what you haven't got. I like looking at it, it's like a factory doing an audit on parts to find out how much it has in stock, what it has in stock that needs topping up, and what needs replacing completely. So you're just looking for the areas that you've got some or nothing. Technical speak is it's a systematic approach to find out if you're compliant to the requirements of an ISO standard, such as 27001 Information Security Management System. So that's what the gap assessment is. But what's the purpose of the gap assessment? It's to review which requirements of the 27000 standard your business already meets or are not applicable. In this case, within the 27000 in the Annex A controls. If some of those controls are not applicable to what you require within your business, you could have those excluded from your SOA statement of applicability. It helps you identify which requirements of the standard the business has partially met. You may already be doing things. I've never come across a company that has got nothing in place ever. I've come across that has only got 3 or 4 bits, but I've never come across one that's got nothing. So this also helps you identify what you're actually doing. And maybe you're doing it, but it's not documented properly, or you haven't got the right evidence to show it, but you're partially compliant with that. So that's what another purpose. But the real purpose is to find the gaps where the business does not meet the full requirements of the standard. And that's why it's called a gap assessment. So let's have a look at the gap assessment requirements. The 27,000 gap assessment is an evaluation of your business against the requirements of the standard as it stands today. That's what we're going to be looking at. So what you're going to need is, first of all, a copy of the 27001 standard. Now you can download this from the ISO website, which I highly recommend, but you really do need to have this by your side when you conduct a gap assessment. You're going to be referring to this all the way through. A very important thing is to get commitment from the executive management for the support and resources that are going to be required to conduct the gap assessment. This is a step that a lot of people don't take. They get told, right, I want you two to go and do a gap assessment of 27,000. You get your standard and off you go. And then they ask for an interview with somebody who turns around and says, no, I'm too busy, I can't be bothered with that. If you've got the commitment from the executive management, you've got a big stick that you can turn around and say, this is from the top, it's not from me. So it's important that you get that commitment from the executive management. Ideally, you need 2 members of staff to do this. More would be nice, but a minimum of 2 really. For one person, it's a lot of work. Believe me, I've done lots of gap assessments, and it is a lot of work to prepare these. If you've got nothing in place, the preparation of checklists and templates, etc., does take up time. So try and get 2 members. If you're having 2 members of staff, have them from different departments. So when it comes to their department, the other person who's not in that department can actually do the gap assessment against it. Unfortunately, most of us are human. I'm not sure about Jerry, but most of us are human. So if we were looking at our own department and we're doing a checklist and we come on and say, I think we've got something, I'll just say yes. It's too easy. So you need somebody who's independent from that department to do the gap assessment. So 2 members is ideal. Make sure that everybody knows what you're doing and why you're doing it. Don't just drop in an email to Fred from IT support saying that you're going to have a gap assessment next Tuesday and we want to see the following information. He's going to have a fit or he'll probably go sick that day. What you need to do is send out a global email to all your staff saying, just be aware over the next 3 weeks, Ted and Jerry will be conducting a gap assessment as a precursor to us looking to implement the ISO 27001 standard. Your cooperation and time would be highly appreciated. Thank you very much. Please wait. The next email you'll get will let you know when and where we're going to conduct the interviews. Give them time to assimilate what they're doing. Change management is a difficult thing to manage. So if you drop something like this onto them, people start to panic. So a bit of awareness beforehand will smooth a lot of problems out. I'm speaking from experience. And this is the most important thing. You need to have patience and you need to have humor. A gap assessment, if this is the first time you do it, is going to be quite a lengthy, convoluted experience, evolution. And you're going to need patience because you're going to go and sit in front of an interviewee who's been aware for the last 3 weeks that a gap assessment's coming up. You've told them in the email, which we'll cover in a minute, what to expect and what sort of information you're going to be looking for. And he's pulled bits and pieces. And when you sit down in front of him and he says, oh, I didn't know you wanted to look at that. He said, well, I did tell you in the email. Oh, yeah, but I didn't think you were going to look at that bit. So you're going to have patience. We don't want to intimidate them. This is not a spot check. This is a gap assessment. And humor. Humor can break down barriers. Humor can diffuse situations. So, if somebody shows you something and you go, is this it? And they go, yeah, really? And then you can have a laugh about it. Okay, so it's serious, but you don't use this as a witch hunt or a interrogation. It's an interview to gain knowledge about what is being done and what's not been done that would fit the requirements. So preparing for the gap assessment, I always emphasize the 5 P's. Prior, preparation, prevents poor performance. So preparation, preparation, preparation. So what do we need to make sure that we're going to have a good gap assessment? So first things we need to do is identify the scope and the objectives of the gap assessment. Now the scope is what areas of the business we're going to cover, what is going to be included within this gap assessment. 9001 can be specific to just IT areas, etc., but you can actually open the scope up with the likes of other ISO standards like environmental or health and safety. You don't have any choice. That's carte blanche across the company. 9001, you can pick and choose, very similar to 27,000. So the scope is important because within that scope, those are the areas you're going to be checking against the requirements. So you need to have this fully identified before you start. And the objective, what is the objective of the gap assessment? Well, we've already stated is to assess the businesses, processes, etc., against the requirements of the 27,000 standard. That is your objective. And that's what you need to tell people what you're doing. You've got to review the standard. I will be honest, if you can't sleep at night, read an ISO standard, you'll be asleep after page 6. It is heavy going. They do use terminology that is not normal in normal speak. However, they do have a small glossary at the front that explains the word shall, that means you must, and things like that. But you need to read it and understand it. You can't go to an interview half-cocked, not understanding actually what you're asking. The good thing is that if you don't understand a clause, there is a plethora of information on the internet that you can go to. That will put it into layman's terms, but try and understand it in ISO speak, because that is what a certification auditor will be looking at. Make notes as well. If I were you, I'd get the copy, download a copy, make a couple of photocopies, and then use one that you can highlight, make notes in the down the side or whatever it is to help you identify key areas or key questions that you need to ask. So you've got your perfect copy that you just bought off ISO, bless them, and then make a couple of copies that you can use to make, you know, your marks, your interest, your information, your questions that you need to think about. Next thing you need to do is produce a checklist, and I'm going to show you an example of one of these in another slide. But this is a list of all the requirements and then a place to indicate whether they're fully compliant, the company is fully compliant, whether the company is partially compliant, or whether it's non-compliant, and certain areas whether it's non-applicable. Especially in 27,000, we're looking at the Annex A's controls. Then you also need an area to show what evidence was shown to show that they were compliant. This is the important thing. Making sure that you see the evidence. If somebody turns around, if you ask them, say, right, okay, do you have a process for key control? And he goes, yeah, okay, yeah, we have. You don't just hit, yep, compliant. The next question is, can you show me that process? And they should be able to produce either a flow diagram, an SOP, a work instruction, something that can say that this is how we follow it. If they don't, then it's not compliant because you haven't seen evidence to say that they actually comply with that requirement. This is the important thing. Even if it's your best friend sat on the opposite side of the table that you're asking questions to, he turns around and says, yeah, you know, Ted, that we do this. So yeah, I know that, but I need to see evidence that you're doing it. Whether it's a checklist, somebody signs off something every hour, something like that, something to show that you actually fulfill that requirement. So you need to create a gap assessment checklist that has all the requirements down one side, an area to say whether they're compliant, not compliant, or partially compliant or not applicable, and then another area to say what evidence you've seen to show that they're either compliant or partially compliant. We go a step further in CertiKit. We've produced these gap assessment checklists, which we sell on our website for all the standards. We actually have an area for actions. So you discuss with the interviewee, well, you haven't got that, you do it, but you haven't got it. How would you prove to me, what do you need to put in place to show me that you actually got that? Is it a procedure? Is it a checklist? Is it a memo? Is it a work instruction? And you write that down for future use. A good checklist will save you time during the gap assessment. So take your time doing it. Make sure you capture all the requirements so you don't get caught out. Next thing you need to do is identify the persons that you need to see with regards to the area of the standard. Now, a lot of people think you go straight to the managers and ask them. Yeah, if you want to look at policy, definitely go and talk to managers. If you want to look at procedures, talk to the people who are doing the procedures. Don't talk to managers. I'm not saying the managers don't know the procedures, but a manager's job is to get the results from the output of those procedures or procedures further down and do what he needs to do to keep the executive people happy or the customers happy. It's the operators who know the procedure. So when you make your list out, don't just look, all right, information security, I need to talk to the IT manager, right, fair enough. I need to talk to the information security officer, yeah, fair enough. But hang on a sec, one of the requirements is backup. Do either of those do it? Oh, no, that's Joe. He's one of the operators. I need to talk to Joe about backups as well. So make sure you identify the right people to look at the right areas of the standard. It may be while you do your gap assessment and you're talking to Jerry, who's the manager for IT, and you say, right, Jerry, tell me how you do this. Do you have this in place? And he goes, well, yeah, we do. I'm not 100%. It's been a while for I've done it, but Joe does that. Maybe you need to talk to Joe. Make a note in your checklist on your actions. Need to talk to Joe. So your list might grow, but it definitely will not get any shorter. I promise you that. But make sure you have the right people for the interviews. From that, try and create an estimated timetable. Now, if you've done gap assessments before and you know what you're doing, and you're a sort of smallish company, you could probably do a gap assessment in a day, day and a half. If you're a bigger company and you have multiple sites, or you need to visit other sites because they are within the scope of your gap assessment, you need to allow other days, extra days to do this. So from the list of people you've got, you'll be able to say, right, Ted and Jerry are in that location, so I need them for that requirement. So maybe I can do those two in a day. But however, Joe, he's actually in our London office, so I need to talk to Joe. So can I do that by MS Teams or Zoom? Investigate that. Failing that, do I need to travel down there to do it? You need to think about all of this when you look at a timetable for your gap assessments. A gap assessment takes as long as it takes. If you need a week to do a gap assessment, plan a week to do a gap assessment. Don't cram it all into 2 days, because you see on the websites, you know, we can do a gap assessment for you in 24 hours, 48 hours. That's because these people do it day in, day out. Like myself and Jerry, we do gap assessments almost every month. We're doing a gap assessment, somebody or other. We know what we're looking for. We know the people that we need to see and talk to because we've talked to the clients. If you're doing this for the first time, take your time to do it properly. It's going to save you so much time at the end of the day. Preparation, preparation, preparation. Obtain consent from the executive management. You've got your timetable. Go up to the CEO, to whoever's the sponsor for this, and say, right, this is a list of people I need to see. This is the timetable we've got. It's going to be over 4 days because we need to look at different areas of the business that they're spread out, and just explain why you've done that one. Can you please authorize this? because 9 times out of 10, when you send out your emails, somebody's going to say, I'm busy that day. I'm having my hair done. The car's being washed. I've got a toothache booked. Whatever it is, they'll look for something not to do it. Having obtained executive management permission, you've got that clout to say in your email, have been authorized by executive manager to conduct the gap assessment. We've allocated you the following date and time for your interview. Could you please confirm that you are available at this time, at this place? And that's it. But you've said at the beginning, executive management have authorized. You've got that clout. And once you've done that, push out the emails. Make sure you do it in good time, not the day before, not the week before. Do it a couple of weeks before if you've got the time. Do it a couple of weeks before. And then the day before you do the interview, just send out a confirmation email again. I've done gap assessments where I've booked for a multi-sited company. I've booked to go and see somebody, sent out the email. I got the yes, I'll be there, available. And then the day before, I've sent out the email, you know, hi Joe, don't forget I'm coming across to see you at 10 o'clock just to go through some questions for the gap assessment. And he goes, oh, I can't because I've got to be, I'm on a course. HR's dropped me on a course and all that. Okay, it's a pain in the backside, but it saved me a trip from one where I am to their other site. Okay, that's not a problem. When are you available next week? And get them to give you a date, and then put that into your diary. Amend your timetable, and make sure that you then send out a confirmation email to him. I will be with you next Tuesday at 11 o'clock for an hour and a half to go through the questions for the gap assessment. Thank you for your time. Simple as that. Keep it sweet, keep it happy. People will be more than pleased to keep going. So, preparing for the gap assessment, it's going to take you some time to do this, but it's worth doing it properly. Do take your time. Hopefully there's going to be 2 or more of you in the gap assessment team. Do it together. Okay. This is an example of one of our CertiKit gap assessment documents. This is looking at Annex A8 of the standard. So on the left hand side, it's split into different. So on the left hand side here, we've got area or section of the actual standard. So in this case, A8 asset management, A8.1 responsibility for assets, A8.2 information classification, A8.3 media handling. Next column, I've got the subsections within each of those main sections. So in A8.1, I've got 4 subsections, and each of those has got a requirement, which is my 3rd column. So this is telling me what we need to be compliant with. And then I've got an area to say whether they're compliant, not partially compliant, not compliant, or non-applicable. In our toolkits, we've done this so we can actually code it, so it's easier to look down the section and say, right, there's loads of red here, so that's a big chunk of work to be done. Or there's lots of yellow, so okay, that's a big chunk of work to be done, but a lot of it's already done. And then green, don't need to worry about it. It's just an easier thing for us to pick up on as auditors to see, right, okay, that's good, you've done that. Actions needed to meet. This is, again, get the interviewee to suggest actions to get them compliant. Don't try and second guess them, especially if it's not your department that you're interviewing. They should have an idea how to get there. So if you're saying, like, you know, all employees, external parties shall return all the organisation's assets in their possession upon termination. In this case, they're fully compliant. Actions need to meet requirement. They've got it, they do it, but it needs to be embedded in their contracts as well. It wasn't in the contract. It's not that it was partially met because they actually do it. It's part of their leaving routine. But the suggestion was if it was already embedded into the employee's contract, it's another safeguard that's there. Evidence here provided. So if they're compliant, we would have evidence here. And then the owner of the owner who is going to be doing this action. You can put their names there. And then just off here, you can't see it here, I have a spare column for notes that I've just put my own notes in, like need to see Joe in IT support with regards to this. So I know then I need to go back and look at that. You need to do this for every area of the standard. So from clause 4, the standard's set up in 10 clauses. The first 3 clauses are not auditable. They're not really part of the management system, they're background information. But from clause 4 down to clause 10, and then annex A all the way through to the bottom one. This is what's going to take some time. So you use the copy of your standard. You can do it in Excel. You can do it as a Word document, however format you want to do it, it's entirely up to you. You then go through the standard, list the requirement, list any of the sub requirements, list the area, list any sub areas, and list the requirements of those areas as they're written, or if you want to translate them into English speak or layman's terms, you can put it in there. But you can use the standards terms if you want to make it easier, if you fully understand the standard speak, and then an area for you to be able to mark whether they're compliant, partially compliant, not compliant, or non-applicable. Like I said, we've already got these checklists available on our website for sale for 9, 14, 45, 22301, 27001 GDPR, and they're already set ready for you to go. Okay, the fun part. That's all the hard work done. This is what I think the interesting part is, when you're getting in front of people and actually conducting the gap assessment. I would strongly suggest that you conduct it in the same order as the standard is written in. So you start from clause 4 and you work your way through context of organization, leadership, planning, etc., 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 until you get to 10. When you've done your checklist, you may have, if you're pretty switched on with this, you could actually then look at the associated Annex A controls with those requirements in the main standard and link those in at the same time. Or maybe you want to do those separately. It's entirely up to you. But try and do it in the same order, because it makes it easier when you start doing your report to be able to follow it through. So when you arrive, when you've got your email, sent it out, got confirmation, day of the races, try and arrive at the venue a little bit earlier. Now, it might be in the same office block, but a different room. Make sure you get there a little bit earlier, that the room is set up for it. There's nothing worse than somebody coming and you're moving tables around, getting chairs out of the way, etc., etc., trying to plug in your laptop, trying to find an extension for it. Try and arrive a little bit earlier to make sure that everything's in place, ready to go. Set the scene, keep it calm, so when somebody walks in, it looks professional. It's also a good time to make sure that the auditee turns up. You know, you get there a bit earlier, you can give them a quick phone call. All right, Joe, I'm just setting up now, mate. Look forward to seeing you in about 10 minutes. Oh yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah, okay. So it's a good time for doing a bit of a catch up on that one. When they're sat down, you've had a bit of a chat, breaking the ice, etc. Explain to them then why you're doing these interviews. He's already read it, but try and explain to him again. Like, you know, the company's decided they're thinking about implementing 27000, which is the information security management system, and there's lots of requirements for that for us to be compliant. So what we're trying to do is just to find out what we've already got in place, so we don't have to do it. And I know we do a lot anyway. So if we can find out what we've got in place, we can get those out of the way. Then we just look at the holes that we need to do. Just explain it to them in a nice, easy way. Explain the sort of evidence that you're going to look at to make sure that what he says they do, they do. You can't just take their word for it. Unfortunately, you've got to have collaborative evidence. If they don't, then it's got to be marked down as a non-compliant. It's as simple as that. And also tell them it's not a witch hunt. It's just finding out what we do and what we don't do. If you don't do it, or you do it but you don't record it, don't worry about it, because in the process of implementing this, we'll put things in place to show that we do it. So you put them at the ease, get them on your side. It's just going to make the gap assessment go a lot easier. So you then go through your checklist for them. So if you've got like a 15-page checklist, don't bring 15 pages out. Try and find the page that's relevant for them, take that out and just use that one page. It's less intimidating for them to be honest, that's all it is. So then go through each of the requirements as you've written them down your checklist and explain to them if they don't understand the requirement. If you're using ISO speak, explain, like, you know, where it says the organization shall implement and maintain, and he goes, what? So it just means that we have to implement and maintain the procedure for whatever it is, etc., etc. You may need to so dumb it down to get your questions across. So you need to think about what you're going to ask, how they're going to ask. If they have that 5-mile stare looking at you as if they're saying, what planet are you from? Then you need to think about how you're going to reword it to get it across. Ask them if it's a question like, do you have a procedure for document control, clause 7.5? And they turn around and say, yeah, we have. Can you give me that procedure? I haven't got it here. Where is it? We have it on ShareFile. We have it on Confluence. We have it on something. Okay, can we go to your desk? Can you log in and can you show me that? Don't get sidetracked. Don't let them try and say, we've got it, you know, it's on there. You still need to see it. Hopefully, within the email and you've told them what you're going to be looking for, they may have already prepped that and maybe print out a copy of something so they can show it to you. Immediately record the outcomes of the results of the questions you do. Don't wait to the end to fill in your checklist, because some of these sections are quite long. And if you're not filling it in, you're just talking, oh yeah, you got that, okay, and you just make a quick note. You haven't got that, yeah, it's fine. You may then, when he's finished, he's gone off now to get a cup of tea and to wipe the sweat off his brows, etc. And you look at your checklist and, oh, what did you say was non-compliant for 8.4? No, I can't remember. Hang on a sec, we'll need to get them back. So as you go through the questions, make sure you mark off whether they're compliant, non-compliant, etc. What the evidence they showed you were, what it was, whether it was a form, whether it was a procedure, a checklist, a work instruction, whatever it is. Make a comment in your evidence box, and if it's got a reference number, put the reference number down as well, because that's going to help you later on. If they haven't got it and you say, well, how would you implement that? Make sure you put those notes in that actions box. Okay. Get them to talk, you know, say, okay, like that, yeah, okay, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, hang on a sec. Did you say you're going to do that? Yeah, confirm what they're saying. Don't leave it to the last minute, because you will forget something. You'll get somebody come back, and what you'll start to do then is build up a little bit of resistance from them saying, well, you've asked me this before. Why are we doing this again? We don't want that to happen. ISO implementation is difficult enough if you've got some resistance. So the least resistance, the more people you got on board before you start, the better it is for everybody. So just by making sure you do your job properly, by filling in that checklist, you will save a lot of time, and you will also stop that build up of resistance. Last but not least, thank the interview for their time, their knowledge, and their cooperation. Make them feel, you know, thanks ever so much, mate. That was really good. I didn't realise that. You know, I'm a great believer every day's a school day. And if when you're doing a gap assessment, you will learn things about your company that you didn't know. Appreciate it and let them know that you do appreciate it. Because when you come back to them asking the question, another question later on for something else, they go, oh yeah, he's a nice guy because he, you know, He said thank you, and he was really polite. We had a laugh about things. It's all about setting up perceptions prior to the implementation of your standard. So this is an example of a gap assessment after we've pulled out the information and we've started looking at the analysing the results. So in this case, it's section 5 in leadership. At the top area, we've got the requirements in English speak. Underneath are the findings of that gap assessment. So in this case, you can see in that gap assessment finding number says at the top leadership total. Within this requirement, there are actually 18 requirements there. Oh, sorry, 18 sections. Underneath that, we then go through the separate requirements like leadership and commitment, policy, organization, 8 sections. Number of requirements met, in this case, 1 partial. Not good. And then we look at policy. There are 7 requirements within this. There were 3 partials. And then beside that, we've actually got the percentage of that requirement met down the side. And because some people are good at looking at figures and numbers and that, and some people taking information by looking at pictorial, we stick a graph in underneath just to make it. But you can do this any which way you want, the way of you recording your information. It's totally up to you what format you've got. So you've done your gap assessment, or you're in the process of doing your gap assessment. What I'd suggest is that at the end of every interview, you record your results. Don't leave it until you've done like all of clause 8, no, clause 6, all of clause 6. You've done all of that. You've seen 8 people for the requirements of clause 6, and then you get together and then you start, oh, right, well, we need that. That goes there. This goes, that was him. And he was, but that. Start looking and documenting your results at the end of each interview as you go along. Again, it just saves time. You may get to a point where an interviewee has dropped out, but somebody else down the line is available who's not quite in line with your timetable. Take them, do the gap assessment, document their results, and put it to one side, ready to slip into your analysis document in the right place. Okay. So do it on as soon as possible after the interview. It just makes things a lot easier. It's fresh in your mind. There may be things that was said that you didn't actually write down, but you thought, oh yeah, I need to remember that. It's a lot quicker, a lot easier. If there's more than one of you, as one person is doing the questioning, the other person could be recording on your checklist. When you're doing your analysis, if there's 2 of you, one person could be reading out the results of the analysis, sorry, the results of the interview, and the other person could be marking off the actual results. So, okay, Ted, he was compliant with 2 requirements there. The other guy writes down 2 for compliant. Partial for requirement 6.2.1, so it's a partial there. Non-compliant, non-compliant, non-compliant for the rest of them, non-compliant. So one person's recording it as the other person's reading out what was done, the results of the actual interview. Again, if you're doing it properly, start from clause 4 and work your way through, and count up the number of compliance, non-compliance, compliance, partially, non-compliant, and NAs. Total them up for each section as you go through. So as I said, so you do clause 4, total them all up, do clause 5, total them all up, do clause 6, total them all up, do clause 7, total them all up, etc., etc. Then table, because you're going to put the information into a table, because it's easier to read. It's better for when you send it to the executive management. It's better for them to understand exactly how many are compliant and how many not compliant, because it stands out like a sore thumb. This is an example of a gap assessment result table that we've done for one of our gap assessments. On the top left-hand side here, we've got the sections, we've got total requirements per sections. Yes, it's compliant. No, it's not compliant. Partial or not applicable or excluded. And then on section 4, total number of requirements were 9, of which, oh look, 9 non-compliance. Section 5, leadership, 18 requirements, 18 non-compliant, totally non-compliant. However, there were 4 partially compliant ones, but they needed a lot of work. And you just work your way through each of these sections, and then through the annexes, from Annex 5 to Annex 18, if you're looking at the old management system, or Annex A5 to A8 with the new 20,022 standard. So we've got all this information. We need to put it into a document that we can actually send off to the top management to say, look, this is a fantastic job we've done, and this is where we got the holes that we need looking at if we want to go for implementation. So the 22,000 Gap Assessment Report is a document that helps identify the gaps in the business processes, procedures and systems as compared to the requirements of the 27,001 standard. So the things that you need to have within your document. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is the list of the minimum sort of information you need in the sort of order that you should be putting it in. So you need to have an executive summary. The first page, we were we were told by executive management to conduct a gap assessment for ISO 27001 to see how our current processes, etc., match up to the requirements. Just an executive summary that goes in there. That is then followed by the scope and objectives. Remember, we talked about scope and objectives right at the beginning when we were looking at defining what we were going to do, how our gap assessment was. Write it in there so the management can read what areas of the business that you were looking at and the objective of the gap assessment. Methodology. How did you go about conducting the assessments, including the sort of tools you used, if you use tools, and the techniques? Generally, a gap assessment is on collaborative evidence, interview, and observations. Those are the sort of 3 tools I use when I do it. Collaborative evidence is where I say, right, do you have a IS policy, Mr. CEO? And he goes, yes. So, okay, can you show me your IS policy? Yeah, I can. And maybe he flashes up his laptop and he shows me on the website. Okay, I, on the way into the building, also noticed that the IS policy is posted on the wall of reception alongside their quality policy. Nice touch. So I've collaborated the information, I've done it through interview and got confirmation, and I've also observed it in another position. So those are the 3 methodologies I use. You may use other things like, you could put MS Team interviews. I put one-to-one interviews, face-to-face interviews. It's entirely up to you, but it allows the management to know exactly how you've conducted it, what you did to get the information required to produce your findings. Talking of findings, that's the next section. This is the core of your report. That will show you with leadership, where we had the requirements, the findings, and then the nice little flow, nice little diagram underneath, graph underneath. That's the sort of thing you need to put in your findings. Do it by clause, in the right order, and then all your annexes afterwards. Detailing the gaps. Remember, it's a gap assessment. So if there are big gaps, proper gaps, you need to be able to detail those gaps. What also helps is if you can identify the severity or potential impact to the business by not implementing something to get rid of that gap. It's a good selling point if you want to implement 27001. This is followed up by recommendations. Now, remember I said when you ask an interview if they're not compliant, how would they go about becoming compliant? This is where you can use that information, recommendations. So again, you could either do this by clause against the gaps, or you can do it as a generalization. You know, based on the findings of section 4, we would recommend that the following be implemented. A document procedure for this is written. A new checklist for this is done. Awareness training for new staff, etc. Whatever it is, recommendations. Corrective actions can go in there as well. And then finally, your conclusion, your personal conclusion as gap assessors, the state of the business against the requirements of the standard. It could be sweeping. It could say ABC Limited has been evidence of the fact they are now in a good place to move forward to implement ISO 27000. The number of gaps that we identified and the actions to do it will quickly be able to be achieved to enable us to successfully implement the ISO within X amount of time frame. Or it has become evident that there is still a lot of base work to be done to make us in a position to start implementation. You've got to be honest. This is money that you're looking people to invest in getting an implementation of the 27,000 and the thousands of pounds they're going to spend for certification. So you've got to be honest with this. Don't try and brush it over and try and make it look good. You've got to be brutally honest. That's what they're asking you to do. Be brutally honest. Your conclusion. Don't forget, they didn't do it. You did. So be honest about it. And then finally, any annexes you want to put in there. Now, the annexes can include supporting documentation. You could have transcripts of your interviews. You could have copies of your checklists in there, or anything else relevant that you think should go in as supporting evidence to that report. Take your time in doing this document if it's your first time, because it's a document that is powerful to management. Okay, it's a really good tool. Your report should be clear, concise, and actionable. So when you've got recommendations, they should be all relevant, actionable actions. And if you can, if you want, in one of your annex, maybe a roadmap towards certification in there. So once you've done your gap report, get it off to the executive management. First of all, read it, then give it to somebody else to read, then read it once more, and then send it off to the management for review and signing off. Once they've signed it off, you can then share it with the relevant interviewees for their information. I think this is important that it goes back to the people who are participating in it, because they can see what their effort was in that 20-minute, an hour interview, what the impact was for them. Again, this is you're planting seeds for the future implementation with people. It also shows that you're professional. So it goes off to executive management after you've read it 4 times. They look at it. If they've got questions, they'll probably come back to you and say, Ted, what do you mean by this? What's the cost implications of this? For me, if somebody said, what's the cost implications for this, I would turn around and say, well, I wasn't asked to look at the costings. I was asked to look for the gaps within the management system. However, if you want, I can go back to the person and we can look at a costing for that solution. Again, just try and be helpful. Just smile. Then get it back to the people who did it, who were part of it. So they are still part of it. So in summary, what we've covered is we know what a gap assessment is on its purpose. We know that it's a methodical approach to identifying through interview or observation the areas of businesses processes, procedures, documentation, policies and leadership that are either compliant with the standard, partially compliant, or not compliant. Create your team. Try and have 2 people on the team. It's a lot of work for one person and you can't audit your own department. So please try and have 2 or more. The more you have, the more you can divide the workload, the quicker you can get things done, but a minimum of 2. Preparation, preparation, preparation. Do your homework. Get the standard. Read the standard. Understand the standard. Create your gap assessment checklist. Check it and then check it again. Identify who you need to talk to and create an interview diary. Work from clause forward onwards in the logical order, because you'll find as you go through this, things actually do flow. The standard is written in a way that information from clause 4 fills part of clause 5 and is a feed for clause 6. Clause 5 feeds clause 6 and clause 7. Clause 6 feeds clause 8, clause 9. Clause 7 feeds clause 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Clause 9 was all of the above, and clause 10 just is making sure that you know how to continuously improve and corrective actions. So if you do it in the right order, your gap assessment will actually start to make sense. You will see links between departments in this way. Compile your results, check them over, and then produce your result table. And then finally from that, create your gap assessment report. Read it again, read it once more, give it somebody else to read it again, then send it off to the management for their approval. If you've got any questions, answer them best as you can. Once you get it back, send it off to the people that you've been interviewing so they can actually see the results of what they've been doing. It's probably one of the best ways to learn about your company of doing a gap assessment. As a consultant, and I've worked with different companies in different sectors, and for me every day is a school day, especially doing a gap assessment. I learn so much, and if I'm a consultant and then I'm going to be working with a company who are going to be doing the implementation, I've already got a fairly good idea of what is in place, and I can start using the gap assessment for me to create an action plan for the implementation. So a good gap assessment is going to take an awful lot of hard work out of producing your implementation plan prior to your implementation phase. So just to finish off then, how can CertiKit help you? Well, but besides the extensive toolkits and the gap assessment documents that we sell, we also do a gap assessment service. We can now do it for the new version of 27,000 2022, but we also do gap assessments for all the other 9, 14, 45, 22,301. And we can do that within 2 days and 3 days with a gap report as well. We provide ongoing tool package support. So if you've got a toolkit, within that toolkit, when you buy that, there is a support package. So you get unlimited email support. We can review up to 4 of your 3 completed documents. You have access to all our video libraries and our blogs, etc. If you do buy a toolkit, there are lots of documents within each toolkit. Some of the toolkits have got like 100+ documents in. Each of them are customizable to your own business. You can have your own logos on. You can put your name within the document, so you don't have to go in and type it in all the time. We can actually do that for you as a service. We can put all of your documents in one file swoop and then populate all your documents with your company's name in the right places in those documents as part of our logo replacement service. And then finally, myself and Jerry, the 2 consultants, we offer ISO consultancy, internal auditing and gap assessments to a raft of different companies and different sectors. Our experience goes between us, we've got like 60 years of experience across different sectors, including aerospace, military, manufacturing, printing, service delivery, all of that. So we're also been delivering ISO consultancy for a long time as well. So we are providing those services to people who are interested in it. And then finally, we can actually do a full pre-cert audit. It's like having a certification audit, but it's not with the sting in the end. What we can do is we can commit for 2 or 3 days, depending on the management system, and conduct an audit as an auditor for a certification body would be conducting it. It's twofold, really. It's a two win-win for you. First of all, full audit will check to see that you are compliant and you're ready for certification. So you're not paying out thousands of pounds to find out you've got non-conformities, and then you're going to get a pushback and come back in 6 months' time. We'll be able to sort those out and then help action plan if you have got non-conformities. But the more importantly, by doing this, you will get the experience of what it is like to be on the end of a certification auditor. It's very different to having an internal audit to having a certification audit. There's ways that you can preempt them, and we'll be talking to you about those during the pre-certification audit, and what sort of things they're going to be looking for, and the questions they're going to be asking, and how they're going to be asking those questions to try and trip you up. So a pre-certification audit will give you that information, plus the peace of mind, the fact that everything you got there is ready to be certified before you go and spend your thousands of pounds. I'd like to thank you all for your time and your patience. I hope you've enjoyed that and it was useful. It is a big subject, and I don't think we do a lot of justice in about an hour, but it's an important thing. To do this right, if you do this right, it is going to make implementation and embedment and effectively your audit a lot easier in the long run. 3 or 4 weeks hard work at the beginning will make the 4 or 5 months or 6 months to get to certification a lot easier, because you'll know what you need to do, where you need to concentrate your resources and your energy to become compliant, and to get, it's not just be compliant, but also getting it embedded, because that's what an auditor is going to be looking for. It's not just going to tick in the box, oh, you have got a procedure, well done. He's going to say, have you got a procedure for doing backups? And you're going to say, oh yeah, we did, yeah, we got one of those. Okay, can I just talk to the person who does this backup? Because he's the one who's doing this, he should know this process. So it's not just about being compliant with a tick in the box to say that you've got that document, it's to make sure that it's embedded within the company. So by doing a gap assessment, knowing what the areas are missing, you can concentrate your resources to get those fixed, and that will give you time to get those fixes in place and embedded prior to certification. So when your auditor comes in and says, right, let me see your backup policy. Yep, let me see your backup procedure. There you go. Let me talk to Fred, who does all the backups. Okay, Fred, just talk me through your procedure. Yeah, oh yeah, you got that all down. Can you show me your backup log? He's going to be looking for documented evidence that you're actually doing that procedure. So you've got a backup log. It's been signed every day. It's initialed, time and date, etc. He's going to check that, because that's his proof that your process that you said that you do, that he doesn't know that is there, is actually being done. So gap assessment helps you identify that, to put those things in place and have them embedded prior to certification. If there are any questions, Jerry?
Somebody asked about, I didn't get a chance to write down what you were saying about how all the controls flow. Can you repeat? Is what you've shared with this approach applicable to the 2022?
Yeah,
I would say yes.
This gap assessment is the same across all the ISO management systems. The only difference is there's no Annex 22 in the other ISO systems, Annex A controls. So it covers all of it. It's a generic gap assessment, but I've specifically looked at the 27001 standard with the Annex A controls in.
Yeah. There was a question about C-Star audit at level 2 versus 2022. Yeah, they are subtly different, because with C-Star you're looking at cloud security certification and probably even as far, things like Azure compliance and all that. So you're getting really more into a technical level of certification of cloud platform. But That said, some of the Annex A controls, particularly with the new 2022 version, some of the controls that are in the Annex A do address, not in a great amount of depth, not to the same level as a C-Star audit, but do address some of the controls necessary for cloud-based systems. And of course, then you can also go to you know, some of the additional standards as well, specifically for cloud-based applications. I think it's 2717. 18, yeah, is it? So, yeah. Something like that, which are based, so you can actually look at those alongside.
And again, if you're looking at 2717 or 18, you do the same process. Get the standard, reduce your checklist, and do exactly the same thing to look at compliances. So it's the same format for it.
Another question about, can you repeat what you said about how the sections flow from one to the other and how they connect lead to the others?
Okay, well, in a nutshell, clause 4, context of scope, scope and context of organization. Within that, there are areas that feed information into other clauses. So context of organization, 4.2, identifying the needs and requirements of interested parties. That feeds directly into 6.2, actions to address the needs and requirements of interested parties. So if you don't fulfill that requirement in clause 4, there's no way you can fulfill that requirement in clause 6. Processes, 4.4, the organization must establish, document and maintain the processes required to have an effective management system, something like that. I can't remember the exact word, but it's along those lines. That feeds directly into clause 8, processes. 8.1, 8.2 is the processes, so that feeds into that. You look at clause 5, which is leadership, your policy, and then you've got your roles and regulation, roles and responsibilities. They feed, the policy statements in there actually feed into your 6.3, which is your objectives, and into your roles and responsibilities, into your compliance. All of those feed into other sections, other clauses, and it's like that all the way through. All ISO standards are designed that information in one will be needed to either populate or stimulate another part of the standard in a further down clause. So there is this cascade of information is required. I do have a diagram somewhere, but I'll hunt it out. And if you leave your email address, I'll email that document across to show you how they work.
I mean, all I would add to that is, you know, when I'm working with implementation projects with clients, I can't underestimate how much something like clause 4 has a bearing on everything else that goes after it. And, you know, they look at you a bit sort of starry-eyed going, what do you mean by that? And the reason behind it is that quite often, depending on how narrow or broad your scope is, it can fundamentally affect how much of the activities that are involved in your management system are. Now, if I can just give an example of that, if you decide, for example, to exclude from your scope, which you're entitled to do, sometimes it's a bit difficult to justify certain areas out of scope, but let's just for argument's sake say, oh well, we're not going to include our sales and marketing group and our HR function into our scope. We want to very much scope it down to our IT organization. Well, therefore that is going to have a fundamental effect on clause 5, you know, and resources. Well, what are the resources that are required to support your management system, which is what clause 5 is all about. Well, if you're going to exclude certain groups like sales, marketing and HR, and it's your choice to do that, then obviously those resources aren't going to be relevant or won't be applicable at that point in time. So therefore that has a knock-on effect to what resources you actually need to support it. And similarly then, well, if you then feed that into your risk assessment, which is clause 6, you know, you're not going to have to include risks and assess necessarily risks on areas of the business that are out of scope. So as you can see, everything builds on that initial scope statement, and that then drives how far you then go throughout other succeeding activities within your implementation. So hopefully that makes sense. I can't stress enough as well the honesty side of things. You know, don't tell yourself you're doing things when you're not, because it'll only come back to bite you when you actually go for your certification. So be brutally honest, and if you're not sure, rate it as non-compliant, and then you can look at it later and say, well, actually there is something there. I'd be honest. And the other thing I would say as well is, if you're doing something like 27001 gap assessment, it's worth combining some of the Annex A requirements in at the same time that you're looking at some of the main clause. So for example, clause 7, where you're looking at supporting groups, and you're particularly looking at things like your HR department for training and competency and training records and all those. So also, whilst you've got the HR people there, you may as well talk about vetting and onboarding process and recruitment and all the good things that go in. So a lot of the Annex A7 requirements, look at them at the same time and tick those boxes off. Otherwise, you'll be doing clause 7 and then go, oh, we've got all this stuff here in Annex A7, which is also HR related. So that's the only other thing I would add, is try and bring in some of the Annex A requirements where appropriate to look at them at the same time as you're holding the interviews, and that with the various people on some of the other main clauses of the standard.
I think with 27001 is don't think it's all IT stroke IS.
No.
I've seen this a lot of times. They've done the gap assessment and they've just been sat talking to people in the IT department. Well, they're the wrong people, which is why when I said make a list of the relevant people against the requirements of the standard, clause 7 is predominantly HR in there. You're not going to be talking to IT about HR. So make sure you've got the right, you're talking to the right people. Don't get blindsided because it says information security. So that's cyber security and all that sort of stuff. And go off down to IT and think you're going to do the whole gap assessment down there.
Yeah.
Do your homework and make sure that once you've built your list of requirements, identify who you need to talk to that is relevant against that requirement. Yeah. And don't be scared of going up the ladder as well. You know, if something needs to be leadership, when you do the gap assessment and leadership, you're going to be talking to the executive management, full stop, because that's where it sits. That's what clause 5 is all about, executive management. So you've got to have a little bit of a backbone when you start quizzing your CEO or COO or the financial director or whoever it is, and you say, right, do you have a policy for this? And he goes, yeah, we have. Well, can I see it? Well, no, I'm a bit busy now. Well, if I don't see it, I've got to put it down as non-compliant. You've got to stand your ground. He's already authorized you to do this, and hopefully he's going to be, you know, resourceful enough to encourage you in it and support you in it. So he should be able to answer your questions as well. So you're not just looking at the operators, these are important people to talk to. You're also looking at the top end of the company, the CEO, COO as well. So don't be scared of putting their name in it and dropping them the same email that you drop everybody else and expecting them to respond saying, yes, I'll be available on this date. Don't let it go to the secretary or anything. Just email them direct. You're not interviewing the secretary, you're interviewing the CEO.
Yeah. And again, just probably one last thing from me. Again, I'll pick up on the Annex A. Although I said, you know, bring in some of the Annex A requirements and discuss them alongside some of the main clauses as standard. Also be very clear as well. And again, this is where clause 4 has a bearing on this. Be very clear about what's in scope. And if you're absolutely certain that certain Annex A controls, for example, are not relevant to your organisation, and you're really confident that those Annex A controls are right. And a good example of this is Annex A14. That's a common one with software development. You know, if you're a service company and you don't develop software, you don't do any in-house development, whatever, then you quite clearly Annex A14 is not relevant to you. So don't go into doing a gap assessment, assessing things that you know are clearly out of scope, because that's a waste of time for your business. You know, you're going to be busy enough assessing the things that are in scope. So don't start wasting time assessing things you know very clearly are out of scope before you start. So, you know, just have that in mind, and a clear indication of which Annex A controls may not be relevant to your organisation. If you're not sure, include them. If you're definitely sure they're not in scope, like A14 for example, then you know, don't waste time gap assessing them, because you know you're clearly not, you're going to say, well, we haven't got anything, and then in hindsight you think, well, we don't do any of that, so it defeats the object. So that's it pretty much from me. Anything else I can add? There's a few people said, could you share this diagram?
Yeah,
so we've got your email address.
Yeah, we'll get the emails
in that,
and
so.
I'll send that to you first thing, at least latest, but first thing tomorrow morning. I'll try and do it straight after this. And it's a simple diagram. It just shows how each clause of an ISO standard feeds into the next clause. So you get doers, supporters, doers, supporters, doers, supporters as you go through. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's sort of shone some light on an important operation within an implementation of an ISO standard. Get this right and it will make things a lot easier. Don't forget, if you're going to do this, you've got to be patient, but more importantly, have a sense of humor, enjoy it as you do it, and have a laugh as you're doing it. So thanks ever so much for your time. There will be a link sent out to you by our marketing manager either tomorrow or the day after, and that's the link to the webinar. And there'll also be a link to no, I'm sorry, there should also be a copy of the slides pack sent to each of you as well. If you don't get it, again, just come back to us and then myself, and then we'll get them sorted for you.
And I think,
so
yeah, next month we've got another webinar, I think, on auditing. I've got the pleasure of doing that one. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm sure there'll be a link going out soon that if you're interested in internal audits and that, I'll give you some insight on that. So that's next month. Yep. So thanks very much. Enjoy your evening. Weekend's almost here. Take care. Thanks again.